Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/spookshow. Then go over to morbidlybeautiful.com as we are now part of the Morbidly Beautiful Podcasting Network.
It has been established that persons who have recently died have been returning to life and committing acts of murder.
Have you checked the children?
I want to play a game. The box. You opened it. We came.
Here.
This is the All-American Spookshow.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the All-American Spook Show. I'm Josh. I'm joined here with Donny.
Yo.
And the Professor Smoak.
What's up?
Unfortunately, Will could not be with us. He's a little under the weather, so he won't be joining us for this huge milestone episode. 150 episodes of the Spook Show, matter of fact.
Yeah.
We always say this every little milestone we hit, probably about, every 25 episodes or so. We can't believe we've made it this far, but here we are.
4 years later, right? A little bit over 4 years, I guess.
It's knocking on 4.5 years ago because we started in October of 2018, so we'll be celebrating our 5th anniversary this October. We just figured what bigger, better way. I mean, we actually had a list. We kind of all, I think we all came up with 2 nominees, and then so that gave us 8 movies. They were all huge horror releases, and we kind of put them all on the same wheel this time around, and we spun it, and this is what it landed on, was the Texas Chain Saw Massacre from 1974. But I don't think it would have been disappointing on any of those that we had. I mean, we had nominated some of the biggest horror movies of all time that we had not talked about on the Spook Show just yet. Not many much bigger than this, right, Smoak?
No, this is a granddaddy of the genre, at least of modern horror, especially when we talk about 70s on, let's say. It doesn't get much bigger. Yeah,
highly influential. We debated this, right, I believe, back when we did that slasher special, as to whether you could kind of count this as a slasher, right? I think it's kind of slasher adjacent in a way, but you will see this on some list of best slasher films and stuff, right?
Yeah, there's always that divide of what exactly makes a slasher movie pre-Halloween, because a lot of people consider John Carpenter's Halloween to be the first fully fledged slasher movie, and that anything before that is kind of falls into what they called proto slashers, or movies that influenced the slasher genre later on. So really, it's
splitting hairs,
whatever it to be. Whether you like Black Christmas, some people consider that a slasher as well. So it does get included in lists for slasher movies, whether you deem it a full-fledged slasher or the proto slasher genre.
I definitely would consider, say, for instance, Black Christmas a better example of a slasher movie, what they became, especially than I would this.
Yeah, it's kind of I kind of sort of reference it towards like heavy metal, for instance. You could get people to argue till they're blue in the face that heavy metal started with Black Sabbath. I'm in that camp, let's just say. Not to make this about metal, but metal and horror are cousins, right? So, yeah. I'm in the Black Sabbath is metal camp, and anything before that was proto metal, right? Other people are no, Led Zeppelin started metal, and a little bit earlier, a few years earlier in the '60s. So there's always going to be that argument of what was the first slasher movie, or whatever, or whether this one is included, or this or that other one is included in there, or whatever. But yeah, I would say it's got more going on for it than your typical slasher movie does, maybe, but it definitely does fall, I think, in that genre, and of course, Leatherface is included with the pantheon of the top slasher killers.
Yeah, I think we've had those discussions too before. We've never done a full-on Mount Rushmore episode, but we've talked about doing that in the past, and maybe we will one day. But I think if you're doing the Mount Rushmore, Jason, Freddy, Pinhead, right? I'm blanking on what they call Scream, Ghostface.
Ghostface.
Yeah, Leatherface is right there. If he's not top 4, he's 5, 6, 7, right? He's right beside him, if nothing else. So there's no question.
Don't forget Donny's favorite slasher killer would be in there too. Maybe Chucky.
Chucky, yeah, of course.
Oh, fuck you guys.
Oh, I can't wait to get to the Child's Play series. But we're doing Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but this isn't the beginning of a new series, but it could be. I mean, they made a good handful after this. Some of them kind of direct sequels, others kind of reboots and whatnot. I mean, there's various positive and negative. But before I do want to talk about all this, and we got a lot to talk about here. But let's just hit pause on that and just go ahead and throw out a few things on Front Street here. Number one, if you've never listened to us before, and there's a good chance you might not have because this is a bigger release, so maybe we got a lot of first-time listeners. We are a spoiler-filled podcast here on the Spook Show. So we are going. If you've never seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, good Lord,
what's wrong with you?
Yeah, what the hell? You know, why are you listening to this first and foremost if you've never watched it? But yeah, we encourage you to go watch it. Come back and listen to the rest of this because we're going to spoil it if you haven't. Also, as well, we encourage you to go over to aaspookshow.com. That's the center of the Spook Show universe. You can get on our YouTube channel from there where we have all of our cool series lined up over there. We got Hammer Horror in order. We've got Grindhouse Gutter. We've got Spook Show Rewind, and we just introduced a new one just last month in Video Vortex. So that's available on our YouTube channel. You definitely want to check all those different series out. And they are vastly different series on the YouTube channel. And then, of course, we have our Patreon. You can reach it from the website there, patreon.com/AASpookshow. That's where we have every month video minisodes, including the library, the professor, and other cool things that we do there. And the main event over on Patreon is every month we do Crapster Piece Theater. Every month we put out a poll. We nominate 4 turds. You choose which one stinks the most, I guess, of which I wish you would pick the one that stinks the least, but you don't. You pick movies like Cats and then, kill us a little bit on the inside every time we have to watch these things.
Yeah, movies that we could have gone the rest of our lives without just having to watch, But,
oh, yeah. Well,
thanks, guys.
We've had a few of those already for sure. I think we've basically been doing Crapster Piece Theater for a year now, and we've definitely had a few that, look, I managed to avoid all my life up until now. So thanks for that. But
accurate.
But yeah,
we all choose the movies that go on Crapster Piece together, each of us, and then everybody out there in Spook Show land votes on it. So, somewhat of it is us to blame a little bit, but a lot of times we put movies on there where we're hoping that the other one gets chosen.
Yeah.
But no. Y'all want to torture us. So.
If nothing else, it proves that we're not a lucky bunch of guys. We need to avoid Vegas and quit playing the lottery because we have no hope. But that's over on patreon.com/AASpookshow. With that, all of that out of the way, we'll go ahead and toss to the trailer for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
This is the movie that Rex Reed called the most horrifying motion picture I have ever seen. This film is positively ruthless in its attempt to drive you right out of your mind. It accomplishes everything it sets out to do with brilliance and unparalleled terror.
Franklin!
This is the horror movie to end them all.
Sally, I hear something. Stop.
This is the movie Rex Reed called the most horrifying motion picture I have ever seen. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre from New Line Cinema.
All right, there you go. That's the trailer for that. So, I guess before we dive into the ins and outs and the whatnots and have-nots, Smoak, I guess I'll toss to you first. What's your history with this one?
I don't know exactly what year I saw it, but it had to be, first of all, this is a home video. This is the first movie I ever bought on home video, and it was Betamax. Without going into that whole deal, let's just say that my parents bought a Betamax at the time when Beta was about to go out. they got a good deal on it, I guess. So they didn't realize though what was going on with the VHS about to take over and Beta about to be gone, right? So they bought the Beta machine, and then short time after that, there was only two video stores in town that rented Beta movies. All the other ones had switched over to VHS, right? So and this other one started systematically selling off some of their Beta titles as well. So I picked up Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It had to be about 1986, I would say. 85, 86, somewhere. I think it was 86, somewhere around in there. And bought it on their used bin. And then that was the first time I had seen it because for whatever reason, though, well, because of the Betamax thing. And I don't know where this movie had been in the store before, but they didn't have it on the shelves. I could not find Texas Chainsaw to rent. And a reminder, I only had two options to go with as far as beta tape. So the one store didn't have it at all. Or for whatever reason, I must have had it at some point, I assume, because it was a big rental. But the other one had taken it out of service, I guess, and ended up putting it in their previously viewed to sell later on. So for some reason, I had avoided this movie, not because I didn't want to see it. It had this legend built up around it, though, in my head for the longest time. Because Texas Chainsaw is one of those movies that around that time, your friends maybe had seen it, or some older friends maybe, you talk to them. It was a legend going around this movie, and you hear all these stories about it. And you hear how, first of all, and we'll get into this, the sort of myths and whatnot of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but you hear a lot of like, wow, this movie's so gory, it's so messed up, people get sawed in pieces and all this stuff. And so as a teenager or preteen, I'm hearing all this stuff and I haven't seen it yet. So I have this thing built up in my head about what it's going to be when I finally do see it. So when I finally did find it and buy it on that previously viewed tape, to be honest with you, the first time I saw it, I was slightly disappointed in it. Because it did not live up in my head to the hype that was built around it through legends of other people talking about how disturbing and disgusting and gory and all this stuff it was. So I'd already been well-versed somewhat in horror movies like Dawn of the Dead and some other things that I'd seen well before Texas Chainsaw because I was able to get my hands on them, rent them, or whatever. So, the first time I saw it, I was slightly disappointed. It took me another watch at least, if not two more watches, to fully appreciate what it was. Like I said, once that hype had been alleviated in my head and I actually watched it the first time and got over that little bit of initial disappointment and it not being what I built it up to be in my head, then I was able to enjoy it for what it was. So probably about the third viewing of it, I realized what a powerful movie it was. And so that's sort of my history with it. So how about y'all?
Yeah, for me, I probably didn't see it until sometime, in the mid 90s, probably. That's just because, our age differences or whatever, but it wasn't something that was like, when you're a kid, like your parents aren't going to let you rent that.
Oh, yeah.
So so it wasn't until sometime in the early to mid 90s before I could start picking out my own stuff. And, eventually, I was able to rent it and watch it. And I think I kind of fall in the same camp, like that legend got built up in your head. Like, oh man, this is supposed to be like the most jacked up movie ever made. And then when I saw it, I'm like, okay, well, it's just, there's some stuff, but, mostly it's just it felt like to me there was just a girl screaming for 30 minutes, and then the end, but a personal story to that, it was like a legend, so to speak, or a story in my family that my parents had rented this movie, probably around the same time, right? Like that mid 80s, back when, we didn't even own a VCR. Like they had to rent the VCR and the tapes kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
So my parents had rented it. And my brother, who's roughly about 3 years older than me, we were in bed. He snuck into the room, in the living room while they were watching it. And then, he peeks from behind the couch and he sees them watching this and it freaks him the fuck out. He screams and, runs away. So it became like a story in our family, right? That he got the shit scared out of him, when he was too little to be watching this thing. So that probably didn't help my case for seeing it any earlier than I did either, right? That it scared the shit out of him. But so it was much
and knowing your brother that's just hilarious.
Yeah. I don't remember what age he was, but I'm guessing probably definitely less than 10, somewhere between 6 to 10 years old, so that didn't help my cause for seeing it when I wanted to see it, but it was many years later. What about you, Donnie?
I first watched it right about the same time that you guys did. Probably a little bit later. Probably right around the I guess the late 90s, maybe.
You and I are pretty much the exact same age, right? There's only like a month or so between us, so probably about the same.
Something like that. Yeah, it was about the mid to late 90s for me.
But like I alluded to earlier, this was just the beginning of a whole thing. Although there was a huge gap before they finally made the second one. This movie released wide in the United States. Well, it actually played first. It played in Austin, Texas on October 1st of 1974, but then it got released wide whatever weekend, about 10 days later on October 11th, 1974. So that's when the masses started to see it in drive-ins and theaters across the country.
When you first saw this, after hearing about it and, just the whole buildup from the first time that you saw it, maybe you were, a little disappointed as I was, because I heard about the whole, I don't want to say stigma, but buildup behind it.
The hype.
Yeah. So from then to now, what in your guys' opinion, what makes this one of the best horror movies of all time? What makes it? Is it just because it's a classic, or is there something specific about it that holds weight even, through all of the, great horror movies of all time? Like, what makes it great?
You mind if I take it first?
Go ahead.
Yeah. How about it?
Yeah. For me, like I said, once I got over that initial hype out the way and everything, and then I don't know how long it was before I got back to it the second time. I do remember, though, I might have the years off, because I remember Texas Chain Saw 2 came out in 86, and I had seen the movie and grown to really love the movie before Texas Chain Saw 2 came out. So my years might be a lot. Maybe it was 84 or 85 when I first saw it. Whatever the case, upon reviewing it a second and third time or whatever, I realized I think the reason it's so strong is because of what it doesn't show. It is because of when people see this movie the first time, and whether they've only seen it once, that hype was built up in their head because of viewing it and coming away from it with this sort of legend of the movie that didn't even exist, but they built up in their head, so to speak. In other words, that no actual limbs are sawn in this movie except Leatherface's own leg when he gets hit in the head with a wrench and the saw falls and it, tears into his leg a little bit, right? That's the only time you ever see the chainsaw meat and flesh in this movie. But yet you can take 10 different people that saw the movie back then in the 80s one time, and then they'll say how disturbing it was. I can't believe people's limbs getting sawn off and all that. It's really what's not shown, that your mind sort of you see an image of the saw going down, let's say on I can't remember the character's name in the movie, but after Sally gets hung up on the meat hook, and then Leatherface cranks the saw up and starts going to town on one of the kids that's laying down on the the guy hit in the head with a sledgehammer a little bit earlier. And I said Sally, I didn't mean Sally. I meant the girl he hangs on the meat hook, right after he brains the guy in the head with the sledgehammer. So he's got her hanging on the hook, and then he's going to start sawing on the guy, but everything's off angle from the camera. Like, you don't see anything. You hear him start the saw. He's going, and you see him sawing something, and it's the body, but you don't see it meeting flesh. You don't even see blood flying around or anything, but your mind goes there anyway.
Yeah.
And for that matter, her hanging on the meat hook, there's nothing shown. Yeah, Pam, right? That's it.
Yeah.
You don't see the meat hook penetrate her back. You don't have to. Like, you see her going towards the hook, then you see him, Leatherface, lift her up and bam, slam her down. You feel that hook going into your own, you feel it. You don't have to see anything. It's like your mind creates the image for you. And I think that's part of the power of the movie, as well as it being shot the way it was on a 16 millimeter, being blown up to 35 millimeters. There's all sorts of artistic things that even Tobe Hooper himself couldn't recreate, and never even try to recreate in any of the other movies he did.
Yeah,
repeated viewings, it gets stronger.
I agree with everything that Smoak just said, as far as what makes it enduring is the fact that they're not showing much. But the thing is too, Tobe Hooper, when he first submitted this movie, he was like, yeah, this will get PG. And he's thinking it's because there wasn't a massive amount of visual gore, right? But instead he submitted it and it got rated an X, which means nobody's, especially at the time, nobody's going to fucking see this movie. So he actually had to go back and make a lot of cuts and then resubmit it, and it got an R rating. And that's where we are, now. But to the point, this is the dude that made it. He's like, yeah, this isn't bad. It'll get a PG. No, it got a fucking X. But that proves, even though you're not seeing much, there's still some pretty. It's all in your head kind of thing, right? Like you said, you can feel it. You can Like without seeing it, you can see it. And I think it's visceral in a way that like not a lot of movies are that show even more, you know, like, cause it sticks with you. So I think my initial disappointment with it was because you didn't see those things, but now I have grown to appreciate it more over the years. Like Smoak said, because you don't see those things.
And it's funny, it's a disturbing movie. I mean, we're jaded kind of now, and as horror fans, get jaded, right, over the gore and stuff they see. But I still think this movie has the power to disturb in it, and it has something to do with that pseudo documentary style, like I said, from the film grain of it being 16 blown up to 35, and then what all these various elements that go into it. It's very pseudo documentary like, and you feel the angst and everything in those scenes, and we'll get into as we're describing it in the farmhouse. Like, and they were feeling the angst as actors because of the heat in that place, the smell of the animal bones and the food that was rotting. All these elements to it. I think their performances were enhanced for better or worse for themselves. You know, they probably hated it at the time they were going through it, but after the fact, and what came out of it is very visceral, as Josh said too. But just based on that style of filmmaking, I think.
And I think too, like as time goes on, and if you're big fans of horror and this movie too, you learn more about that process that they made to, went through to make this, and then you really appreciate it even more. Like you said, the heat. They made this in the middle of, in the Austin, Texas area. In the middle of the summer. It's like July, August, in mid Texas heat. It's getting up to 110 degrees, something like that.
And had air conditioning inside that farmhouse either.
Yeah, like they have a budget roughly more than it takes us to make this podcast, to make this movie as fast as they can in the heat because they don't want to spend more money to rent more equipment. So, the more you learn about these things and the fact that, like, basically nobody really got paid from this damn movie, even though it was so successful, there's a lot of stories there. I think it makes you appreciate it even more the more you see it. It's definitely one to me, and we'll get to it, I'm sure, with our star ratings and everything, that I grow to appreciate it more and more every time I watch it. And like my rating almost slightly goes up a little bit more and more as time goes on and every time I get to watch it. But like I said, this was just the beginning of what became a whole franchise. This one, like I said, 1974 is released. It wasn't until almost 12 years later before our good old buddies at Cannon Films knocked on Tobe Hooper's door and got him to do the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. That came out August 22nd of 1986. It was that. Now, Smoak, do you think that'll be cannon fodder or a regular episode? How do you think that one will appear on the podcast?
I think it deserves a cannon fodder thing too. But I mean, it could go either way. But being canon, I think we could easily put it in cannon fodder. But we should probably at some point, not to say exactly what we do because we're not there yet, but maybe sometime soon we can get it on the cannon fodder just to kind of tie in this Texas Chainsaw Massacre, thing out a little bit further. I know eventually they're going to get terrible. And I haven't even, like Hellraiser, I haven't seen all of the Texas Chainsaw franchise, believe it or not. But at least the first three, like Hellraiser, will be entertaining.
Well, plus two, I guess, there is that precedent that we just set with when we did Hospital Massacre, / X-Ray last month. Where, like, yeah, that's a canon movie, but we treated it like a regular episode with our canon rating. So maybe that's another one that, we play like that. But then they kind of came hot and heavy in the years following the second one. In 1990, you've got Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. Then in 1995, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Next Generation. Then 2003, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was a remake, but not quite shot for shot, but pretty much a pretty faithful remake of the original. You've got the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Beginning. That was in 2006. Then in 2013, Texas Chainsaw 3D. Then in 2017, Leatherface. Then just last year, almost literally 1 year ago, exactly, straight to Netflix, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which that one was more not really remake as much as kind of a reimagining reboot kind of thing to me. But then again, 40 years later or whatever it was, kind of. So it's weird. But yeah, there's a lot of weirdness in a lot of those movies that I just, spouted off there as far as like where they fit, are they connected? Then I think it was kind of like its own little mini reboot universe when they started over again. It's a whole thing, and they're not all good, right?
No. And I think, well, at least the good thing was I don't think anybody ever set out to try and outdo the original. Even Tobe Hooper, when he made Texas Chainsaw 2, people realized that you're not going to, there was magic in a bottle there that you're not going to be able to get again. It's just all the factors that went into the making of the movie. So you're going to just have to do your own thing with it. And Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, some people hate that movie. And from the very beginning, I've always liked that one for different reasons. And I like the first one. It's got more gore. He decided, to go the other way and put a lot of gore into the second one. A lot more humor, even though the first one had a little bit of dark humor here and there, of course. He added even more of that into the second one. Yeah. It's canon. It's got Canon's name on it. I don't know that it's really, you don't think Canon when you see the logo, but I mean, it's totally Tobe Hooper.
Yeah.
But he just didn't try to do the same thing he did with the first one, thankfully. And nobody else who's made any Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies have attempted to even, emulate that either. For better or worse, they've gone their own way.
That one was more campy to me than any of the others. Now,
the second one?
Yeah, like they were really leaning in on the, like, this is nonsense. Let's just kind of lean in on it a little. It's not full comedy, right? But like you said, there's way more in it, and it just felt campier.
Yeah, it was. And there was as far as the gore, Tom Savini did the effects on the second one. Also, there's a sort of a similarity, and we'll get to it in this movie, The Hitcher, the character of The Hitcher. The character Bill Moseley plays as Chop Top is not supposed to be the same, but he's got a lot of similarity there with The Hitcher, and actually both Ed Neal and Bill Moseley have a bit of similar added style or whatever outside of it. I've met both of them at conventions before, and they sort of have the same similar personality outside of the movie business. Well,
but yeah, anyways, back to some of the background information. It was released, like I said, October 11th, 1974 by Vortex. It was produced by Vortex and distributed by Bryanston Distributing Company. Like we just said a few minutes ago, it was rated R, total runtime of 1 hour and 23 minutes. Of course, on IMDb, it's listed just as a horror. It was filmed, like I said, in the middle of the summer, like July, August heat in 1973 in the kind of that Austin, Texas area, kind of out in the middle of, Nowheresville out there. For now, the budget is where it gets a little rocky to like peg down an exact number. The rough number that I could find was about $140,000. Now, some say it might have been a little less. Some tend to agree that it might have been a little bit more, after post-production and everything like that. But I didn't see any number greater than 300,000. So either way, this movie was made for somewhere between, say, 100K to 300K. And it went on to have a worldwide gross. Now, although it took a long time to get there, but currently it sits at $30.9 million. Now, I say that because it didn't make, it probably made most of that initially, but it didn't make all of that. It took it this was one of those movies that got played in drive-ins and grindhouses and stuff for like 10 years afterwards, just on reputation alone. So it took it a while to get there, but needless to say, successful. But from what I was reading, is it wasn't necessarily successful financially for the people involved because they had to sell off a stake to Bryanston Distributing Company to get it released, and they sold off another stake over here to somebody else, blah blah blah, right? So and the problem is that the cast mainly, and I guess some of the crew, they got points, they got percentage points for doing this movie. So they gave 50% right off the top to that Bryanston Distributing Company. So they didn't even tell the rest of them, all you're getting, the points you're getting are going to be from that other half that we make off of it. So that means right there, they're only getting their points from that 15 million, right? And then I think there was some other stuff that happened after that. So basically it boiled down to everybody got to split up about $8,000, and that's about all they made off of it in the end. And then by the time that there was some lawsuit or something with Bryanston, and basically by the time they settled this thing and got money out of it, Vortex had already went bankrupt, so basically they got nothing in the end for making this movie, other than the fact that, I guess Tobe Hooper went on to bigger and better things. He's probably about the only one out of all this that really got anything, and that was probably just street cred, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And I mean, we might as well here take a minute to talk about Bryanston Distributors a little bit, maybe. As they were started by sons of the Colombo crime family. It was the Perino, Louis Perino and his brother Joseph Perino Sr. were the president and the vice president, secretary, treasurer of Bryanston. And their first movie was Deep Throat.
Oh,
that they
God.
distributed. And then that was followed by, I think, another porno or something after that. And then Flesh for Frankenstein, they did that. Dark Star, Return of the Dragon, the Bruce Lee, Chuck Norris movie. Texas Chain Saw Massacre, of course. Oh, and another movie that we've done on the podcast before that and I don't have the episode off the top of my head, but The Devil's Reign.
Oh, shit. So there you go. That's if you wanted to make direct connections, Donnie, like you do in the Crypt Connections later. There you've got you just connected Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Leatherface to Devil's Reign and William Shatner, which connects to Halloween because that's where they got the mask for Michael
we don't
Myers, for Michael Myers.
I don't track let's see, I track directors, writers.
No.
Yeah, I track directors, writers, producers, special effects, makeup.
But not where the mask came from.
No. No. Not like prop masters or anything like that.
In the end, though, what I'm saying is that is the connection, right? We just connected Leatherface to Michael Myers, and
that's true. Yeah. Slap.
Yeah. Thou art the one. Slap. Jesus.
Oh, man.
I didn't think I would be talking about the Devil's Reign.
Going out of business in 1976 for legal troubles. And, I don't know if it had anything to do with the mafia thing either. But whatever the case, they went out of business in 76.
That wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, and based on everything I read there, what I just, was talking about a minute ago, and that none of this surprises me. And somebody was quoted as saying, like, at some point later, they realized they had sold their soul to the devil, but they wanted to get this movie out. And really at the time, I guess nobody was wanting to touch it.
Yeah, the early days of modern horror movies, and if you want to talk about if we had to say what movie started that, probably would be Night of the Living Dead by George Romero in 1968. That started sort of the modern horror, movies getting a little bit more violent, a little bit more also homemade sort of movies coming up out of people's, like in this case, it was Texas. In George Romero's case, it was Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he also got kind of ripped off by distributors and things because he didn't have a copyright and nobody made money off of Night of the Living Dead. So, yeah, it was a very, very rough beginning for some of these early modern horror filmmakers.
Yeah,
that were these, films that would go on to be legends and very influential, didn't make much money for the creators.
Yeah. Well, if nothing else, like I said, Tobe Hooper and, in the case of George Romero, at least they got the street cred, right? Like, they got to pad their resume with something that went on to be huge and probably did lead to them having other bigger opportunities later on. It might have took some time, but at least there's that. They were able to turn it into something. But unfortunately for some of the other people involved, that's not necessarily the case. But yeah, as far as Tobe Hooper is concerned, he wrote the screenplay, him and Kim Henkel, and he directed the movie. And I would imagine that there's going to be a Spookshow spotlight on old Tobe Hooper before it's all said and done.
Oh, yeah.
And another kind of thing while I'm thinking about it, because I'll probably forget if I don't mention it, is speaking of Tobe Hooper and Texas Chainsaw and things that are influenced by it and how influential the movie is, it influenced another slasher that came out a few years later called The Toolbox Murders. Then later on, Tobe Hooper himself directed the remake of The Toolbox Murders, which is just a little strange,
I would imagine sometimes guys like that would agree, like, yeah, I'll do that again because this time they got more money to play with, So maybe that was part of it. He was one of those dudes, kind of like Romero, though, right? That he worked in the system, but didn't really work well within the system, right?
Very true. Yeah, he was very much because when he got a little bit more money, things for Romero, it was Creepshow was a great movie. He had a little bit more money to work with, but he still was able to do things the way he wanted to. It was basically by the time he got to The Dark Half, that Stephen King adaptation in Hollywood, that he had to kind of compromise. Once he had to compromise his artistic vision and do it under this certain budget, and he's got all this money going to all these other things or whatever. I think they just worked better when they had their own small crew of friends and family that they knew and had total creative control. Once they had to give up that control, they were auteurs of their own vision, so to speak. So they weren't necessarily working that well with others in the Hollywood system.
This movie stars Marilyn Burns, Edwin Neal, Alan Danziger. Yeah, these are names you've probably never heard unless you're really into horror or, really love this movie, right? There's no huge names in this movie, although Gunnar Hansen, who plays Leatherface in the movie, probably ended up being the biggest name, but that's just mostly in horror circles, right? As far as big time, that's about it. Other than John Larroquette, you know, famous from Night Court and tons of other stuff, you know, throughout the 80s and 90s. He's not in the movie. He's the narrator at the very beginning of the movie. And it's hilarious because I saw somewhere that basically he just got paid in weed to do it.
Yeah, they gave him a joint.
Yeah, like
that is awesome.
He didn't make a penny. He just they just gave him some weed and he did. He voiced it.
And they wanted him to read it in an Orson Welles voice, but if he did read it in Orson Welles voice, it still just sounded like John Larroquette.
Yeah. The funny thing is like I had no idea that it was John Larroquette. You know, I mean, I found out years ago. You know, I know now, but like. At the time, you know, when I hear that, and I heard it a number of times in my viewing, I didn't really put it together that it was him. But now, when you find out that it's him, then you can't unhear it. Like, oh yeah, that's John Larroquette, all right. You know, and of course too. I mean, I'm sure he was a good Lord. How young would he have been at that point? I mean, he had to have been what roughly
70. They never shot this.
I don't know when he was born right offhand, but he probably around his early.
He was born in 47.
So, well, he would have been about mid-20s, probably. 73, so yeah. When this was made. So, yeah, either way, that's hilarious. He was paid in weed. But he's probably the biggest name attached to it, right? Other than maybe Gunnar Hansen, just because, you know, we as horror fans, we know who that is. You know, he played the original Leatherface. But who else, right? That's about it, right?
Yeah, that's all that I can really... I mean, well, other than some of the behind-the-scenes people, like, who was it, Daniel Pearl, the cinematographer, he went on to do bigger movies in Hollywood and whatnot, as far as a set decorator and cinematographer, I believe it.
Why fuss and fret about dinner? Why not have it right here? Yes, this drive-in offers everyone in the family a real picnic treat for dinner. We've got delicious sandwiches with all the trimmings and your other dinner favorites, plus whatever you want to drink, hot or cold. Come early before the show starts, or eat while you're being entertained, or at intermission time. So why fuss? Give your family a tasty dinner at this drive-in.
For you, the listeners of the All-American Spook Show, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. So, like we often do, I hopped on over to Audible, typed in Texas Chain Saw Massacre, and what do you know? We found a few interesting things here. We've got Chainsaw Confidential, How We Made the World's Most Notorious Horror Movie by Gunnar Hansen. And it's actually narrated by Gunnar. That one's a little over 7 hours long, and it looks like it's an Audible exclusive, too. So that sounds like, if you're a fan of this, you might want to go check that one out. A couple more here, though. We've got Behind the Horror, True Stories That Inspired Horror Movies by Dr. Lee Meller. And that one's about 9.5 hours long. And then we've got Leatherface versus Tricky Dick, The Texas Chain Saw Massacre as Political Satire by Martin Harris. That one's just over 8 hours long, so that's interesting. But yeah, there's a handful of other things, you know, a lot of kind of behind the scenes type stuff, and especially like that inspired, you know, quote unquote true stories that inspired things, and we can talk about that here in just a second about this one in particular. But yeah, if any of those things sound like they would be of interest to you, go to audibletrial.com/spookshow. Again, that's audibletrial.com/spookshow for your free audio book. So I'm going to hop back on over to IMDb and I'm going to click on plot summaries to see what pops up. And surprise, surprise, we've got a few. It's the fucking Texas Chain Saw Massacre. I'll give you the brief one first. 5 friends head out to rural Texas to visit the grave of a grandfather. On the way, they stumble across what appears to be a deserted house, only to discover something sinister within, something armed with a chainsaw. And because Donny loves, and because Donny loves these, I'm just going to read the longest one as the second one here. It's not as long. It's not as long as some of the other ones I've read, but it's, you know, here we go. This one was submitted by Derek O'Kane over on IMDb. The year is 1974. A group of 5 close friends are heading through the back roads of Texas en route to their grandfather's potentially vandalized grave. Vandalized, boy, I'd say so. Among them are Sally Hardesty and her invalid brother Franklin. They encounter an unpleasant hitchhiker, Neil, who slashes both himself and Franklin with a wicked-looking knife. The others manage to eject the hitchhiker from the vehicle, but shortly after what? The way they... it's afterwards, but they put a space in there. So but shortly afterwards, they are forced to stop and wander over to a small, sinister clapboard house nearby in hopes for gas. What none of them realize is that this house is the home of the ghoulish Leatherface and his evil, demented family of cannibalistic psychopaths. One at a time, the teens are murdered by the Leatherface in horrifying ways. Sally soon finds herself an involuntary guest at Leatherface's home and flees into the night to escape the demented cannibal and his loudly buzzing chainsaw. Can she escape the grim fate that befell her friends and brother? Based on the terrifying true story of Ed Gein. So that's probably a good shift over to what this is supposedly based on, right, Smoak?
Yeah, and then we might as well start there with the fact that from the opening, John Larroquette's opening little monologue there, the very first part of that, I believe, is it about the events being based on a true story. Well, that right there, and yes, they somewhat are, but the way that it comes off is, and the way that also, when I was younger, another thing that added to the legend and mystique of the movie before I knew exactly what it was about is that everybody said, "Oh, it's based on a true story." That there was a guy in Texas with a chainsaw, running around killing people or whatever. So you get this in your head before you see the movie when you're younger in the '80s or whatever, and then you see it and you're like, "Oh wow, this is based on a true story." That's pretty messed up. But then as I became a horror fan, I wanted to know more about the background of it. Yeah, I came across Ed Gein. And read about his exploits. And then you find out that, not only is this movie somewhat based slightly on Ed Gein, but also Psycho was also based on Ed Gein. And there's no chainsaw involved. There's no, but then back then you get people swear up and down that, there was a chainsaw killer in Texas that did all this stuff. And even the legends in Texas, they thought it was true at the time when it came out. And you apparently, according to Toby Hooper and Gunnar Hansen in an interview or something, they swore people would swear that they knew they had a friend who worked in the as like a jail guard, and they knew the guy that the original Texas Chainsaw was based on. Now he's like a cook in the mental institution or something. Or this, that, and the other thing. So you had all these legends flying around, and that just adds to the mystique of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But yeah, you find out that it's really nothing. The only truth in it is somewhat based on Ed Gein, who robbed graves for the most part, killed possibly 2 people at least, maybe more. And he used their body parts for various things like making lampshades out of them, or he'd like have a belt made of female nipples, or he had heads on like bedposts. And he had all this messed up stuff from his grave robbing expeditions, and the bones in the Texas Chainsaw House, animal bones strung up here and there and all that kind of came from reports of what was in Ed Gein's farmhouse, where they found, kind of different objects made of animal bones and human bones and whatnot. So yeah, that part was true. But and then I had to find out more about him, so I'd read novels about Ed Gein and stuff. So it was part of the mystique of it, of thinking that it was a true story, and then finding out the truth later on.
Yeah, I mean, because like Ed Gein's that stuff happened like back in the 1950s in Wisconsin. It had nothing to do with Texas or a guy with, like you said, a chainsaw or anything. It was just similarities. There are some similarities, and there's similarities to other things, but I think I saw where mostly Toby Hooper's concept just came from just watching the bad shit that was on the news in the 70s. You just kind of cobbled it together from all this horrible visuals that you would see just on the daily news.
Yeah, I think Hooper himself even said he didn't even know about the Ed Gein part of it until later. I mean, after the movie was already made, I think that it was just sort of subconsciously in his mind or something about, but he didn't directly base it on Ed Gein. He just found out later after the fact that, there was Ed Gein who did wear human skin masks, at certain points in his escapades from, his grave robbing or whatever. So that was just sort of coincidental in a way.
I had seen something else too. Like you mentioned, Psycho was, kind of loosely is there too as well, right? But I saw one I hadn't really thought about was the other one was The Silence of the Lambs. It's
true, yes,
it's loosely based there too.
I forget who mentioned it. The writer who's the novel? I can't remember the guys that wrote the novel.
Shit, if you hadn't asked, I would have been able to tell you.
I know. If we weren't doing a podcast, it would just pop in my head just like that.
Oh yeah, exactly. You'd be like, oh yeah. That was let me see, Thomas Harris.
Thomas Harris, yeah. I think he had sort of had this amalgamation of various serial killers when he came up, and Ed Gein was definitely, not that Ed Gein was a serial killer, I guess you call him. Whatever, he gets slumped in with it, even if he just only killed a couple or whatever. Mostly grave robbing, but yeah, he was one of the ones that was influential in the writing of Silence of the Lambs. So there were others, but
well, Donnie, where do you want to start with this one? Now that we're gonna talk about some of the highlights here. What do you? Maybe right at the beginning with that crawl. Like I think that was one of the notes that I made. Like that whole beginning sequence. You've got the voiceover crawl by John Larroquette. You've got the flash bulb. The meow, with the noise every time they would take a picture, and every picture is just this god awful like image of a
like a grizzly like not really mummified, just decomposing hand.
Yeah, or a
fingers
skull,
and
mouth,
yeah.
whatever. And then
Appendages,
bam,
yeah.
Then bam, like you hear a report of there was this grave robber, right? And they took some of the body parts from the graves and they made like this grotesque statue kind of in the graveyard. And then it just slowly zooms out from this, this imagery. So like it's a slap to the face and a kick to the nuts just in the first 5 minutes.
Yeah. I like that whole opening with after you get the crawl, it starts in black with the flash bulb going off to reveal the parts of the corpse. Then as soon as the flash bulb and that sound goes off, right, then it goes to black again. And it just keeps doing that. And I do remember reading something about Daniel Pearl, cinematographer, was sort of flabbergasted on at the fact that you would do a movie like you would start it in black with nothing at all, just black screen, and then the flash. He thought it was it went against his filmmaking, his cinema, as being a cinematographer, it went against his style, I guess. But then he said after he saw it, and like, okay, I know exactly what he's going for, and it worked out perfectly. It's just black, nothing you see on the screen, flash, piece of a corpse, and you repeat it for about 3 or 4 different frames, right?
It's funny when you hear things like that from people that were involved in a picture like this that ends up being one of the most influential, people's favorite kind of horror movies. When you hear like they had doubts about shit, but then you realize like, wait a minute, well, they were the first ones doing this kind of thing, So like it would have been strange and unusual the way they did this in 1973, and in 1974. Now you're like, yeah, every other movie's kind of like that, but this is why.
Yeah. It becomes these movies. I mean, you don't realize it, I guess, unless you were watching it before you see the other ones that came out after it. It's how influential it is, even though it might seem like it's a overused scenario. These were some of the first movies to do it, and it was new at the time and innovative, and that's why you see it pop up in a bunch of other horror movies later down the road.
Speaking of new and innovative, are we supposed to hate Franklin? Because if so, I think the new and innovative thing I alluded to there is like, shouldn't you kind of like the guy that's a paraplegic in a wheelchair?
You should.
Shouldn't he be sympathetic?
No, because I mean, I don't want to say no, but when he rolls downhill mid piss, I've seen this movie several times, but I just can't stand this guy. They should have just left him there.
Well, you're not the only one. Apparently, everybody. Well, I won't say everybody, but a lot of people in the production of this movie also didn't like him. But it's not necessarily that they didn't like Paul A. Partain necessarily, but because he was so well at portraying Franklin, the way he was written, I guess, as being that annoying and whiny and all that, nobody liked to be around him on the set.
Yeah. It's just weird to me, like, why they would set the guy up that is in the wheelchair. He should be the most sympathetic. Like, you're rooting for this guy to survive in a movie like this, right? But instead, no, they go the complete opposite direction. Like, no, you want him to be one of the first. It's just it's weird.
Oh yeah,
not only that, but
you got the part where he goes down the hill, right? It was taken, like you said, in mid piss, and he gets blown over by the tractor trailer going down there. Got to go retrieve him and get him back up the hill. That had to be a process in and of itself. But beyond that, once they get to the house, well, before that, you get the hitchhiker, right?
Yeah.
But I'm just skipping forward a little bit to the house scene where, again, when he's in the truck with the hitcher, your focus is on the hitcher at that point. The hitchhiker is more, you forget a little bit how annoying that Franklin is until you get to the house again, and he's going through the whole thing in his head about, is this a sign? Is this a symbol? And then he gets in the house. And they're upstairs, and they're checking out the house and all that, and he's down there being the self-pity party that he's having downstairs.
And then you're like, oh yeah, that's right. Fuck this guy.
He's trying to get the door frame, and he's like yelling at him.
Yeah, plus when they call him they say it in the plot summary too, but they call him an invalid.
Yeah.
Jesus, man.
Well,
come on.
Well, I mean, I don't know. And that guy in particular, the character, I should say, that's probably an apt description because he kind of was, just a whiny bitch.
Now, how about the spitting part too, where he's like, there's visible spittle all over his face and stuff, and this makes you don't like him even more.
You just being ridiculous
And
now.
another one of those things too that there's a lot to throw you off here if you think like, right, you know, of course you got the crawl, but then you've got those pictures, right, of the fucked up imagery. Then you've got the shit at the graveyard and all that. So it's in your mind like, man, this is fucked up. There's a grave robber. What the fuck is he doing with the bodies and shit? Like, so that's already in your head. Then you meet this handicapped guy that you should be, you know, you should be like, oh, there's sympathy there, but you're not. Then they throw you off with this hitchhiker. Like they put this guy in the van, and this guy is fucking weird. Like,
yeah. Before that part though, didn't they show the cattle? I think they're talking about cattle and sledgehammers and how the sledgehammer is not, you know, not human, or the steel gun is more humane, right? The piston or whatever, but isn't that before they meet up with the hitchhiker when they're first talking about that, I believe, and then they pick him up?
Franklin's talking about, yeah, my uncle or whatever used to work in a slaughterhouse, and then he's talking about how they used to use sledgehammers, and then they wouldn't die on the first whack, and they had to, you know, hit them 2 or 3 times to get them, you know. Yeah, so like everything is setting up here to like really just throw you off your game and just disturb you in 1,000 different ways. And it goes along with what we talked about, how like they don't have to show you super gory things. They're just sitting there talking about it. They're talking about the cows getting slaughtered.
Yeah, they're talking about it, and then they show the cows. They come out of the van to show you this cattle farm that they're riding by, and to give a close up of the cow as they're talking about the way he's killed them. Yeah.
But you don't see a thing. All you're doing is looking at cows like, you know, slobbering, and them talking about how they slaughter them. But it's disturbing.
Yeah, what you don't get is that they're talking about themselves. Basically, they're talking about what's going to happen to them. I mean, you don't put that together yet, but later when you see what happens in the movie, that they are cows being slaughtered or whatever, you know.
And then the weird hitchhiker gets in and he starts talking about like, oh yeah, the sledgehammer way, that's the way to go. And then you're just like, what the fuck? You know that's inhumane. Why is this guy, you know? But then he cuts himself with the knife for no reason, and then pulls out a straight razor, puts it away, and then like they're basically like, yeah, fuck off, you know, right? So then he just decides to take a picture of them and then light the picture on fire.
Yeah, he takes a picture like the roads, like the people that are like, you know, on the side of the, like, hey, you know, I took this picture of you. It's a nice picture. You want to give me some money for it, type thing.
$2.
And they're like, no, we're not paying you for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what he does, a little voodoo ritual thing on it and throws it on some aluminum foil and like with some sulfur gunpowder stuff or whatever, and then burns it up and does this whole little ritual where he's like, do it like, you know, flames, yeah. But you know, it doesn't say that, you know.
No, that's actually better than what he actually said.
Flames.
I don't think he said anything, right? He's just sitting there with the like grin on his face with his hands like around the flames or whatever, and then the flames just go down, and he up the aluminum foil and puts it in his little leather, well, it's probably made of human skin pouch or whatever he's wearing. They're all sitting there like, what in the absolute fuck, you know?
Well, as you should.
As you should, I guess. Yep, and then that's when he grabs Franklin's arm and slices it with a razor.
Yeah, and then they toss him out, you know. He's been hexed. I guess not him, but he kind of hexes them. I guess it's kind of the way I kind of felt about it, like, oh shit, this dude done put like the voodoo curse on him or something.
Yeah, because he's rubbing his arm on the side, and that's what I was alluding to earlier when they were talking about Franklin. When they finally get to the house, like you see the hitcher out there, like rubbing his bloody, because he had cut himself. You mentioned that, right? That he cut his own finger or his own hand, rather.
Palm, yeah.
That's what this guy's nutbag. And then, you know, from that blood on his cut hand, he rubs it on the van, and then they kind of figure out like maybe it looks like a symbol. I mean, when they get there, so that's what Franklin's worried about, that they cursed him. He cursed him for some reason or somehow.
You kind of like, you know, jump ahead a little once they finally get in the farmhouse or whatever, and then they start dropping, like, you know, dude getting the hammer to the head, Pam on the meat hook. You know, some of these iconic, especially that one, like just to me on that one with the meat hook thing, it's just brutal because it's like he's treating her like a fucking pig, you know, like to the slaughter kind of thing. Yeah. Like I think that's what is so like the thumping on the ground with her feet and stuff, right? Like.
Yeah, it's just brutal.
Yeah, that's that.
And then just slamming that door.
Yeah, that damn door, that steel door thing. Yeah. That whole image, that whole scene, and we have to go back a little bit on it right before they get there. Whenever they hear this generator going, right, so they figure, okay, well, we need gas because to go back even a little bit further, the scene at the gas station they were at, right, where the guy that, you know, you come to find out this Jim Sedow, the actor, and, you know, like I said, we're a spoiler trail podcast, so
Yeah.
anybody and people that have most people probably already seen this movie know that Jim Seadow is part of the family, and he comes back into the picture later on. But he does something here where you don't think of it right away, but it's also it's something else that comes back to like, oh man, that's messed up. Is that he offers them barbecue, right? They have some barbecue there. You know, they don't have any gas, but he's got some barbecue here, and so he gives them some barbecue, and they're chewing on it. And Franklin's got this this hunk of sausage hanging out of his mouth that has had some people refer to it as a dick, basically. Is that supposed to be? You know, Toby Hooper said no, it's not supposed to be a dick. It's just it is human meat, though. That you find out later after you know later on that's what they're doing. They're cannibals, and they cook up the bodies of the people they kill or whatever, make it into barbecue and all that stuff. So the teens were eating human flesh basically when they're eating this barbecue. You don't realize that until later on. And you're like, damn, that's messed up. And then also the part, like you said, when they get to the house and then they get to they don't have gas, so they're wandering around. What's her name, Pam, and one of the other hippie dudes.
Kirk,
I can't think
the
of
first guy that gets it with the hammer, Kirk.
Yeah, Kirk.
Yeah, Kirk.
They're out walking and they hear a generator, so like, oh, fuel. You know, maybe they have some fuel we could get from them, and they walk up to the house. That whole scene too is very like Daniel Pearl. I don't know if it's Daniel Pearl in combination of him and Toby Hooper that set these shots up. You see them walking from behind, the camera's following them, but the camera's like on the ground looking up so that you see the sun and you feel that heat again. And the heat just plays a crucial role in this movie. And we didn't mention it in the van. When they're in the van, it's so bright outside, and Daniel Pearl had to jack up the iris of the camera so much to capture the inside of the van that all of the windows are so hot from outside that like the light is all you see from the windows. You don't see the countryside hardly at all.
Yeah.
In the windows outside the van, you just see white light, white hot heat basically coming in through the windows. So yeah, heat plays an important role. And like I said, that shot of the sun behind them when they're walking, they get to this house. And then another cool tracking shot was, because I think it's definitely worth mentioning, is, well, first that swing, right? There's a swing made of like railroad ties, like this huge framework of old railroad ties or whatever. They made this frame for this swing to sit in. And the camera goes behind the swings, and Pam's sitting in the swing waiting for Kirk, who goes up, knocking on the door, walks in the house, right? And this scene happens, everything happens really faster in this part, and this is like, you know, you don't think of it these days. At the time, though, it was very innovative, I think, is that he gets in there and he goes he sees that steel door that's open, like some deer heads hanging on the wall back there. It's like a stairwell that leads down to where you don't know. And he gets in that doorway. Bam, Leatherface is there, filling up the door frame. He hits him right in the head with a sledgehammer. He goes down on the ground. He's twitching. You see some blood. Again, it's not like overly brutal. It's brutal. You put it together in your head again that it's a brutal scene without there being a whole lot of blood. There's a little bit of blood splatter. And then he's sitting there twitching. That's the real, like Josh Lane mentioned, that's the real kicker, no pun intended. He's sitting there like twitching with his feet, kicking the ground and all that stuff. And then Leatherface grabs his body, pulls him in there, slams the door, and you get this big boom, in the music or whatever. And your mind, you're like, holy fuck, what just happened?
It does all happen pretty quick with, especially with Kirk and then Pam. And then, what is it? Jerry comes along and sees Pam, like she's not dead, right? She's in the freezer, and like spasming and stuff. Yeah, and then Leatherface pops him with a hammer.
And that was where I think they had some people walking out of some of the original pre-screenings and stuff.
You would think so, yeah. But, like if they've probably hung in that far, and they got there, they're like, all right, well, see ya.
Yeah,
this is, and then and then
there's no gore in there really.
And then they look at each other and say, this is 1974, and then yes, and then well,
oh yeah, we didn't mention there's some other little tidbits that like add to the things, like when they're on the porch of the house before Pam gets killed, before Kurt gets killed or whatever. Mm-hmm. There's a tooth laying on the porch, and it's got a filling in it. And he picks it up, and like Pam's sitting there on the steps, and he's like, "Hey, I got something for you." And like she opens her hand because she doesn't know what he has, and he puts something in her hand, and he's like, "A tooth with a filling in it." You're like, "How the hell?" She's like, "Ugh," and throws it away. Right.
That whole part that with Pam and Kirk going off, like that is a slasher trope. They're just going off to have sex, right? So I'll get.
Basically, that's what yeah. Oh yeah, there was a shot too that I also didn't mention. I mentioned about the back behind shot where the sun's coming. They're walking and you're seeing them from behind as the sun's up in the sky like a big starburst. But also, whenever Pam's sitting on that swing, and after Kurt goes in and he gets killed and she doesn't know what's going on, that she just knows he hasn't come back yet. So she gets up off the swing and you see this really cool tracking shot. And also they had a dolly track that was only about 40 feet long, I think. So they had to, do what they could do with that.
Yeah.
They did a real cool scene where she gets up off the swing and the swing is going and the camera's dollying from behind and goes under the swing and follows her up the stairs kind of thing. Just, again, a really cool shot. Not that it, matters. And I just thought it was very interesting looking, whoever put that together. Well, I guess combination, again, Daniel Pearl and Toby Hooper setting the shot up. But it is very memorable.
Well, then when Leatherface finally comes along and takes out Franklin with the chainsaw, that's pretty much like the next 45 minutes just Sally running around, right?
Yeah, you get some more. It's like it's a lead up. Like they're really making you hate Franklin at this point because, they're sitting there. They don't know what's going on. They're in the dark with the van. At first, they don't know they don't have the keys, right? So like they're just sitting there trying to honk the horn, like Kurt, whatever. They're yelling and Franklin's she's getting annoyed with Franklin, right? And she's like, "Well, just give me the keys." And then they realize that nobody's got the keys. They're like, "They took the keys, Sally." So yeah, they're really making you hate Franklin, as a character or whatever. And then she's got to. He doesn't want to stay there, so she's got to take him with her, pushing him, and he's not the smallest of people, pushing him in this wheelchair through the woods. So it's not like it's even concrete or something like that, with a flashlight to go find the rest of the crew that disappeared. Oh, and then that scene where they're running through the woods a little later. Well, I guess we should talk about Franklin's death, right? Since we've led up to it and whatnot.
Yeah, with the chainsaw.
Yeah, that was a cool shot too, and that was probably the only. I don't know. You say that's the only jump scare? I think that's the only what you might call a jump scare in the movie. Not that jump scares had even had a name at this time necessarily.
Yeah. Probably the only outright kind of thing where it's like, oh fuck.
Yeah, just like they're going through the woods and you see the flashlight that Franklin's holding, kind of, like they're flashing around trying to see where they're going or whatever, and then all of a sudden you hear that, they heard something. They thought they heard something like twig snapping or whatever, and then he's in the light that he's flashing around. And again, this is another brilliant aspect of the editing. Is whenever he's going this way or that, you kind of expect something's going to happen, but you don't really know. You don't expect it to happen when it happens, and that's kind of like the old sleight of hand magician trick of, making the audience's attention be over here, and then all of a sudden this happens over there. So then, he's flashing the light around, then all of a sudden you see Leatherface in the light, and the saw starts up at the same time, and he jumps forward at Franklin. So you see him in the light, you hear the chainsaw, and then he's there. So it's definitely a very effective scene, I think. And then again, he's sawing up Franklin, but you're not seeing the saw. You're not seeing an arm fall, get chopped off, or blood even flounder. You do see a little bit of blood, but it's in the chainsaw, in the flashlight that's still on. You see a little bit of blood get splattered up on Leatherface as he's sawing Franklin. You hear the saw, and you see his arms kind of flailing around and stuff, but you don't see actual contact with it. So again, another brilliant scene of editing and sound and all that stuff to make your mind complete the brutality that's going on without seeing it.
How about when they finally get a hold of Sally and then the whole dinner table scene?
Yeah, that's grueling. That whole rest of the movie that starts in the farmhouse, then on is like you feel the actors, what they're going through in that movie, and it's effective, all right. and the close ups of her eyeball, right, where it's just twitching around, jerking back, and it's like straight close up of it. Her screams, it's a bit annoying at first, especially, but I mean, it adds to just that whole scene of this angst and whatever in the farmhouse.
Yeah. Also, the hitchhiker making fun of her, that is hilarious. It always is. Oh man,
that Ed Neal is like part of him and the cook Jim Sedow. They provide the comic relief, so to speak. I mean, it's not really a relief though. I mean, it's still it almost makes it even more tension more higher whenever they're doing and saying what they're saying, even though you're kind of laughing at it. It's still messed up or whatever. But then they have that little bit of tension, like because Leatherface sawed up the door right when he was chasing her earlier in the movie, and then he comes in, he's like, "Look what brother did to the door, damn it!"
I don't. Yet the hitchhiker making fun of her there is still not as gold as Grandpa with the hammer.
He
gold.
just some half-ass, like I don't know, attempts. Oh God, and it's just off.
I guess he's doing as good as it could be expected for a 150-something-year-old. Now I don't know how old he's supposed to be, but he's obviously very, very aged. Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of the judge, Dan Aykroyd's character in
Oh yeah.
Nothing but trouble.
Nothing but trouble. Yeah, there's some loose similarities there. Just saying.
Rough.
There wasn't a hot dog. Well, maybe that kind of was. But yeah, an overt hot dog scene.
Yeah. How about some mustard?
That's another thing entirely.
Nothing but trouble scene even into Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yep,
found its way in.
It's about once a month. It's going to come up.
Yeah,
it's an easy thing to connect.
It was the number one. What was it? What was our year-end show? That was the winner of something.
No, it was the funniest moment. That's what it was.
Oh, funniest moment.
Yeah.
That 2022.
Yeah.
Yeah. The whole.
Yeah.
The whole sausage or hot dog eating dick nose scene. Yeah, that was the.
Which actually, if you haven't checked out our Spookshow Awards show from last year, it's in our archives.
Yeah.
Should definitely go check that out.
Yeah. If you listen to most of what we did last year, that's a good recap of everything. That's a good one to go back and check out. Sally gets away, after the dinner thing, right? With Grandpa just flailing away or whatever. But like most of it, that's what it is. It's like hide and go seek with Leatherface and whatnot. Right after that point.
True. Yeah.
Yeah. The hitchhiker, was it? She ends up getting away. She jumps out the window. The hitchhiker and Leatherface chase her. Hitchhiker's just kind of slashing at her.
Yeah.
Back razor. Yeah.
Yeah, with the razor. And then like a semi truck comes basically out of nowhere, plows over the hitchhiker. And then the trucker, he stops, grabs a wrench, and then he throws the wrench at Leatherface, hits him in the head.
Yeah.
And then Leatherface drops the chainsaw, lands on his leg.
It cuts himself.
Yeah, and then he gets up, and the trucker he doesn't get back into the truck. No, he just foots it.
Yeah, he just fucking runs away.
There
should have been some follow up to what happened to that guy.
Yeah. I don't know.
Like
he's
in
just
another
wandering
movie.
this countryside. So.
Yeah, he's still just running.
He's still running.
Yeah.
To
this day.
Legend has it.
But you do get the, I know we're kind of fast forwarding through, but like you do get the really cool shot toward the end, once Sally gets away and she's just laughing, out of just pure insanity, right? And Leatherface has just got his chainsaw like spinning it around, like as the sun is coming up. It's just a cool, memorable shot.
Become known now as his Leatherface's chainsaw dance, I guess. Right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Iconic.
Yeah.
And that had to be, and I know it was. Oh well, I didn't mention this earlier too. There was another scene of like some danger involving the saw, but just to shoot that scene, the cinematographer. I'm guessing it was Daniel Pearl that was shooting it with camera at that point, of trying to avoid the saw as he's doing this improvised dance thing. Pretty grueling, I guess. But yeah, there was another scene where the saw ended up. I think it was when they were when Sally was being chased through the woods. One of the scenes when she was being chased through the woods, and Leatherface is behind her. But he also had 3-inch heels. We didn't mention that. Gunnar Hansen was pretty tall and his big frame to begin with. But to make him even more imposing, they had 3-inch heels added to his boots to make him taller even. Huh. So he's running through the woods with these 3-inch heels and a chainsaw with active saw blade and all this. And tripped at one point, I believe, and the saw, he lost control of the saw. The saw went up in the air, and so basically the crew was like, oh my God, where the fuck's it going to come down at? Luckily, nobody got hurt, but it was a grueling moment, I guess. Near accident, at least.
Yeah, I think I saw, too, like when they, with the chainsaw, that part where he had Kirk, the actor was William Vale, when he had him down, and it was like, basically, like in real life, that thing came about 3 inches from his face.
Yeah.
The chainsaw.
Yeah.
And he's basically Gunnar Hansen's like, don't fucking move. You know.
Yeah. And don't move. You're gonna get hurt or you're gonna die.
Yeah. You will die for real.
Yeah. This movie, and again, you can't make this movie nowadays. I mean, you could get some guerrilla filmmakers or whatever in the backyard doing something or whatever, but yeah, they didn't have safety things on the set that they will have in any other given Hollywood movie where they wouldn't be using live blades. With the blade actually turning on the chainsaw in a scene where they had actors, even the actor holding the saw, they would be afraid something would happen to him. So
yeah. So I guess that's pretty much it as far as just the blow by blow. So I guess we'll go ahead and get in the star rating and Smoak. We'll go ahead and I think you nominated this one, right? That it ended up. I mean, we did the wheel spin. But I think you nominated it, right? So
yeah, I put it on the wheel. We put, like you mentioned in the beginning, we chose an old movie and a new movie each. And put them all on the wheel, and this one was one that got nominated. So by the luck of the wheel spin.
So I'll let you go first as far as the star rating is concerned.
As anybody who's listened to the show would know, and for those who haven't, Dawn of the Dead that we covered, and I don't remember the episode number. I don't have it in front of me. We did cover it not too long ago. That was my number one. That is my number one horror movie, and it's just listen to that episode. It's a great episode. It's a great movie. But for me, Dawn of the Dead is a personal experience. At that point, it was the movie that was sort of a watershed movie for me that turned me into more of a casual fan into a lifelong fan of the horror cinema. And going at that point, figuring out who is the director of this movie or who did that special effects and who did, so Dawn of the Dead was the movie that did that for me, and I'd seen it. Around the same time, I guess I saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And as I'd mentioned, Texas Chainsaw, I was disappointed the first time I saw it. And it took me a few views because of the hype that I had in my head before. And it took me a few views to come around to it. So, but now, at this point, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is my second favorite horror movie of all time. And I can't go any lower than 5 stars on it as well. So 5 stars for me for Texas Chainsaw.
Donnie, what do you say?
It's a really good, I can echo most things with Smoak. My rating basically reflects the implied horror, but also, I wish it had a little bit more than what it does. But that said, still gotta pay respects to its genius. I still wish it had more, and I feel like the potential was there for to do more with it. But yeah, I'm gonna say 4.5.
I'm just gonna say 5 stars. I mean, because for me, it's right up there, and that's what I gave Dawn of the Dead. And to me, this is very close. It's right up there, man. I mean, highly influential, and that's taking into account, like Smoak said, my initial disappointment. But over the years, I've grown to appreciate it more and more. And like I said, it's probably like back then, I probably would have gave it like, it's fine, 2.5. But it's like every time I watched it, like it grew on me more and more, and then you learn more and more about it. And I think I'm here. Like if I look at Dawn of the Dead like this, I kind of have to look at it in a very similar light. So I'm just going to go 5 stars. It'll be interesting, like I said, to see what Will has to say about it, since like I think this will pretty much be the first time he's experienced it, from beginning to end, or at the least, I would imagine the first time he's watched it from beginning to end in a long time. So probably have a fresher set of eyes than the three of us. But yeah, right now we sit at a consensus rating of 4.8 stars. So it doesn't get much. It really didn't get much bigger than that as far as we are all concerned. Yeah, and that I think that adds to what we've done. In our new quote unquote calendar year here, we've done a couple big ones, and this is yet another one. So we'll get his thoughts on it. But since he's not here, he can't do the kill count. But we can give you our other little features.
Connections from the crypt.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. All right. So, if you're just joining us, this is a big episode. It's probably a really good one to, if you're just joining us. But anyway, we take the current movie and we connect it to past Spookshow episodes. So, on the cast side, John Larroquette, we mentioned earlier, he was the narrator for Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and he was paid in weed, which I I think he commanded a little bit more for his for this one, but he was also in Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight, which we covered all the way back in episode 129. So that's the only connection from the cast side, and the only connection from the crew side. Special effects crew member Dean Miller. He did he was on the special effects crew for Pet Cemetery from 1989, which we covered on episode number 9.
All right, like I said, we don't have the kill count, but
Gore score.
Professor?
Oh, yes. As we've talked about through this entire episode, there's not much gore to speak of. Even though the movie is brutal in your mind and disturbing in that way, it's not a whole lot of gore. So I'm gonna try and base this gore score on the amount of actual on-screen gore. So some people, it might come across as shocking how low it is, really. And then to go through some of it, I mean, you have, I don't know if you would consider the corpse at the beginning as the flash bulbs are going off as being gore. I mean, it's a decomposing corpse. It's not necessarily gory per se. It's just disturbing in that these, the implications of it, the grave robbing, and they've been put in these various odd positions on top of tombstones and stuff. So yeah, it's a disturbing scene, but not really gory. You have Kirk getting hit in the head with a hammer, and there's a little bit of blood, and it's definitely disturbing and brutal. But the only gore is the blood splatter on him, right? So then you come to Pam getting hung up with a meat hook. Again, same thing. You see her going towards the meat hook. Leatherface is lifting her up. And as I'm talking about the gore score, I might as well mention this because we didn't really mention it either. The meat hook scene, the meat hook's facing her. He's walking towards her. You know what's going to happen. He's going to slam her on that meat hook. They cut when they're making it, and they turn the meat hook around backwards. So then the meat hook is facing backwards. Get back to the scene. Leatherface lifting her up. She's got a hoop on her back, like a brace, leather brace. And he lifts her up and hooks this ring that's on the brace into the hook that's now facing backwards. But you don't see all that. Your mind sees him lift her up, and in your mind, you're seeing it penetrate the back as he's slamming her down on the hook. But really, he's just pushing her down, and now she's hanging by this brace with the hook facing away from her. But it still looks very, very realistic, very well done scene. Not really gory though. I mean, your mind is the one that's completing the brutality of the scene. Then he takes the chainsaw and he starts sawing on Kurt, right? That's that he had hit in the head and is laid on this big wooden slab that's in the room where she's hanging on the meat hook. Again, he's sawing, but you're seeing him sawing. Your mind's putting together that he's sawing up Kirk, but you don't see even any blood flying around in that scene either. So that scene really not gory either. Who was it that went in the house to find Pam in the freezer and Kirk? Can't think of his name right now.
Jerry.
Jerry, yes. So Jerry again gets hit in the head with a sledgehammer too. Again, not very gory, but brutal. You have all the animal bones and everything, but that's not necessarily gory in and of itself. You have Franklin getting killed with a chainsaw. And again, that's the next scene that we see a little bit of blood, but again, your mind's putting together that he's getting sawn up, but all you see is a little bit of blood being flicked up on Leatherface. And then you get to the actual only real gore in the movie is, you have the scene where Sally, Grandpa hits her, once or twice, I guess, with the hammer. There's a little bit of blood maybe, but not, again, overly gory. You have the hitchhiker slashing her back as she's running. And again, it's brutal, and your mind's putting it together for you, but you're not seeing a whole lot of blood flying off or anything like that, or actual razor close-ups like you would see in a little bit later in the 80s slash movies, if they were doing it in the 80s, where you would see the razor make contact with a prosthetic back. You see the slashes and the blood and everything. And again, and Texas Chainsaw 2, you will see that as the Chop Top has a very similar scene, chases a girl down and is slashing her with a razor very much the same way, but you see it more in that movie, right? But, then you have the only, as I was saying, the only actual gore of the chainsaw making contact with flesh is when Leatherface gets hit in the head with a wrench by the truck driver, goes down on the ground, and the saw comes into contact with his leg. And again, that was done by, they had a metal, again, very dangerous, and they wouldn't do it this way today, but there was an active saw blade. There was a steel plate on his leg with a blood bag filled with raw meat and stuff like that in his blood bag, steak or whatever. And so when the chainsaw makes contact with the pants leg, cuts through the pants and cuts through the blood bag, and you see the blood and the meat, So that's the only real gore in the movie other than the blood splatter. And that was it. So when you think about that, a little bit of blood splatter, no actual mutilation on screen. Heck, I don't know. almost want to rate. You almost want to rate it for the brutality of certain scenes, right? But you can't really do that. I'm trying to be, trying to rate it for the actual on-screen gore. I'd probably have to go with a 4.
It's a different type of gore in the sense of like how you feel about it after you've watched the movie and during it versus what you actually saw. So yeah, I think like you said, as far as like seeing it on screen, you don't see a lot. So I think it's a fair assessment of the situation.
The only movie I can think of, the only one really, I mean, maybe there's some others that'll pop up, but the only one I can think of that's as brutal and disturbing as it is with no real on-screen gore to speak of.
So like I said earlier, where we're leaving it for now without Will's rating is a 4.8 stars. Over on IMDb, it gets 7.4 stars out of 10, and the Metascore is 87. That's out of 100. So obviously that's pretty good. You go over to Rotten Tomatoes, and you actually get certified fresh. That's with over 65 critic reviews, 88%. So that's about right. I mean, I would put it a little higher, but 88% is still good, still certified fresh by their scale. And the audience score is 82%. So I think pretty much across the board, it's most agree. You watch this, you kind of, if you kind of know what you're in for, this is the kind of thing you're going to like. If you don't like those ones that stick with you, maybe not your cup of tea. But yeah, that's it for this episode. As far as what we're going to watch next week, we have no fucking idea because Will is not here to tell us what he's picking. So you'll find out when we do next week. We'll just we'll have a movie. So just get ready.
Now, that's actually that has to be the first time that's happened, right?
It seems like it might have happened a time or two before where, like, as of the recording of this, we couldn't tell you what we're going to be watching the next week. And we have changed it where, like we said, it was one movie and then it ended up being another. That's happened a time or two as well. Yeah. So not quite the first time, but yeah, it's very rare that we don't know, in advance what we're going to be doing. But since Will wasn't able to join us and the next movie is his pick, in our rotation. So I cannot tell you right now what it will be, but you'll find out next week when you tune in. Stay tuned to our YouTube channel where we have so much stuff going on there. It's hard to keep up with.
Oh yeah.
Lots of stuff. Yeah. Patreon.com/AASpookshow, all the rest, AASpookshow.com. So for Will, couldn't be with us, Donnie, Professor Smoak, I'm Josh. We are the All-American Spook Show. Here's to another 150 episodes, guys.
See you all.
Oh, yeah. It's been a joy.
Please replace the speaker on its rack when you're ready to leave. Failure to do so will damage both the speaker and your car. We'll be grateful, and so will the patrons who follow you.